Okay, so we've got a stack of articles here all about the 2024 presidential election, and wow, things are getting pretty ugly out there.
Yeah, it's really heated.
This rally that Trump held at Madison Square Garden a few days before the election is really stirring things up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a major turning point in the race. All the anxieties and divisions that have been bubbling under the surface this whole campaign are finally boiling over.
It seems like this rally was planned to get a reaction from Kamala and her supporters.
And provoke, yeah.
And it's not just Trump's words. It seems like the whole event was orchestrated.
Yeah, and it's working if outrage is the goal.
For sure. Having Tony Hinchcliffe, the comedian,
Right.
open the rally with jokes about Puerto Rico being a floating island of garbage. That's not exactly a recipe for unity, is it?
No, not really.
It felt very calculated. And then you have other speakers calling the Democrats degenerates and Jew haters.
Stephen Miller, one of Trump's advisors, even declared that America is for Americans and Americans only.
It's not even dog whistle politics anymore. It's a full-blown siren.
What's interesting to me is how this blatant offensiveness is part of a strategy. This type of rhetoric appeals to a very specific part of the electorate. People who feel disenfranchised and angry, they're receptive to this us versus them mentality.
It's definitely a stark contrast to Kamala's message of unity and inclusion. Do you remember her speech at the Ellipse where she said she'd include Republicans in her cabinet?
Oh, yeah, and the seat at the table for those who disagree with her. That was powerful.
It's classic good cop, bad cop.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it seems to be working. The polls are tightening, and this rally might be the reason why.
It could be.
Speaking of the rally, the Trump campaign's response to the backlash has been, well, interesting.
Interesting is one way to put it. They've given so many different explanations for how Hinchcliffe's speech made it past vetting.
Too many.
Yeah, first they tried to distance themselves, saying it didn't reflect Trump's views. Then they blamed a lack of vetting. But then reports came out that the speech was vetted, and the only thing they removed was a vulgar comment about Kamala.
So which is it? Did they know about the offensive material or not? It all seems very calculated to me.
Right. It really raises questions about their competence or their intentionality. Either way, it's given the Democrats a huge opportunity, especially with so many Puerto Rican voters in swing states like Pennsylvania.
And they're definitely seizing that opportunity. All those big Puerto Rican celebrities like Nicky Jam, Bad Bunny, Jennifer Lopez, Ricky Martin.
Yeah, all of whom had stayed neutral until now.
They've all come out in support of Harris.
It's significant because it shows that this isn't just about political points. These are real people who feel offended and marginalized by this kind of rhetoric. It could have a real impact on the election.
It probably will.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how this whole incident plays into the larger issue of disinformation and the erosion of trust in our political system.
It's a crucial question. This shows how easily disinformation spreads and how it can manipulate public opinion. When a campaign lies about something as basic as vetting a speech, it makes you question everything they say.
It makes you wonder what else they're willing to lie about.
Exactly. That's why you have to be critical of the information you're consuming. Check your sources.
And be aware of bias and manipulation.
Yes, especially in the final days of a close election like this one.
Every vote counts, and people need to make informed decisions based on facts, not fear or anger.
Well said.
So we have this rally that's caused huge controversy, a campaign trying to do damage control in a more divided electorate than ever. Where do we go from here?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? But I think it starts with recognizing the problem, calling out this type of behavior when we see it, and demanding better from our leaders.
And maybe most importantly, remembering that we have a choice. We can engage in respectful dialogue even when we disagree. We can focus on shared values and goals.
And we can vote for the candidate who represents the future we want for our country.
Well said. I think it's time to take a closer look at the Trump campaign's response. Or should I say responses? They've offered a whole bunch of explanations for what happened at that rally, and I think it's worth breaking them down to see what they reveal about their strategy and their values.
I agree. Let's look at their attempts to distance themselves from Hinchcliffe's comments and see if they hold up.
Yeah, let's do that. You know what's really striking about this whole thing?
What's that?
How quickly things escalated. After the initial outrage over Hinchcliffe's jokes, Biden criticized the comments, but then he made a remark that sounded like he was calling all Trump supporters garbage.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't intentional, but that misstep played right into Trump's hands. It gave her a chance to play the victim and distract from the real issue, the offensive language at his own rally.
Yeah, you got to shift the focus.
Now, both sides are trying to defend themselves, trying to distance themselves from comments that actually reflect deeper anxieties that voters already have.
It's a textbook example of how quickly things can spiral out of control in the final days of a heated election. Emotions are running high, and the stakes are incredibly high.
It just shows how easily even a carefully crafted message can be distorted and weaponized in today's political climate.
And that both sides are vulnerable to making mistakes that their opponents can exploit.
This whole thing feels like a tangled web. Every thread is pulling us further into a chaotic and confusing mess.
It's definitely a mess, but it's a mess we need to unpack if we want to understand the forces at play in this election and what it means for our democracy.
Yeah, it really does feel like the line between gaffe and strategy is blurring more and more these days.
So let's try to untangle this a little. You mentioned that the Trump campaign offered several different explanations for Hinchcliffe's speech. What were they? What do you make of them?
Well, at first they tried to just distance themselves.
From the comedian. Yeah, they said that his comments didn't actually reflect Trump's own personal views. It's a tactic we see a lot, you know? Trying to appeal to a specific part of the population, but without actually coming out and endorsing the really extreme views.
But does that even make sense when you think about the context? I mean, this wasn't some random open mic night at a comedy club.
Yeah.
This was a major rally.
Right. A carefully planned event at Madison Square Garden, just days before the election.
Exactly.
And that's when their second explanation came in, a lack of vetting. They said that they didn't properly screen Hinchcliffe's speech and they didn't know about the offensive material beforehand. But then some reports came out that actually suggested that the speech was vetted and that the only part they took out was a really crude comment about Kamala.
So the jokes about Puerto Rico and the attacks on the Democrats were okay, but they drew the line at a vulgar comment about Harris.
It does seem very selective.
It does. So what do you think? Were they trying to deliberately create outrage? Were they hoping that Kamala would overreact and alienate moderate voters? Or was this just a big mistake, a lack of competence?
It's hard to say for sure what they were thinking. But no matter their intention, the fallout has been pretty big. We talked about the impact on Latino voters, but this also raises questions about Trump's character and his leadership.
This isn't the first time he's been accused of using divisive rhetoric. His whole campaign has been based on appealing to fear and resentment.
And let's not forget his history of racist and sexist comments. This goes back decades.
You're right. It's a pattern. It makes you question his judgment, his temperament, and if he's fit to be president.
It really does.
It reminds us that words have power, especially when they come from someone with a lot of authority.
Yeah, and that the choices we make as voters have consequences. We're responsible for holding our leaders accountable for what they say and what they do.
This also brings up something we touched on earlier. The media's role in all of this. They're amplifying this kind of rhetoric.
Oh, absolutely. The media plays a huge role in shaping public opinion. They have to report on these events fairly and in a balanced way.
But the problem is that outrage sells. And in today's media landscape where every outlet is competing for clicks and views, there's constant pressure to create sensational content, even if it means leaving out nuance and accuracy.
Yeah, and that's how we end up with these echo chambers where people only see information that confirms what they already believe. It's almost impossible to have a reasonable conversation when everyone is just talking past each other.
So how do we get out of this cycle? How can we talk about these complex issues when the political climate is so toxic?
It's a tough question. I think it starts with each of us recognizing our own biases and being open to hearing perspectives that challenge us. We have to be more critical of the information we're taking in and look for a variety of sources.
We have to hold the media accountable for the role they're playing in all this. Demand better. We need fairness and accuracy. A commitment to the truth, not just sensationalism.
Well said. And we each have a responsibility to create a more civil and respectful way of talking about things in public. We can choose to engage in thoughtful dialogue, even with people we disagree with. We can choose to listen more than we talk. And we can focus on finding common ground.
That sounds really difficult, but it's crucial if we want to save our democracy.
I agree. The stakes are so high. This election isn't just about who becomes president. It's about the kind of country we want to be.
And speaking of choices, this rally wasn't just about the presidential election. It also showed some disturbing connections to Trump's past, specifically his father, Fred Trump.
That's a good point. It's fascinating and unsettling, and it deserves a deeper look. Let's look at some of the allegations about Fred Trump's involvement with the KKK and how Donald Trump has responded.
Okay, let's do that.
So in 1927, Fred Trump was arrested at a KKK rally in New York City. Now, he wasn't charged with anything, but the fact that he was even there raises some serious questions about what he believed and who he associated with.
And Donald Trump hasn't just said, I don't know anything about that. He's given all sorts of denials and excuses. It's like he's trying way too hard to convince everyone that his father was innocent.
His response, or should I say his multiple responses, are really interesting. It's like he doesn't want to face the truth, and he's willing to change the facts to protect his family's reputation.
And let's not forget that Donald Trump has made racist and anti-Semitic remarks himself. And his niece, Mary Trump, has said that Fred Trump used anti-Semitic slurs at home.
It's a pattern that seems to run through the generations. Like there's a deep prejudice within the Trump family.
It's disturbing to think that this kind of prejudice could be influencing the highest levels of government.
It reminds us that the personal is political. Our leaders' values and beliefs shape the policies they make and the decisions they make.
And it's not just about words. Both Fred and Donald Trump have been accused of discriminatory housing practices, refusing to rent to black tenants. There was even an FBI investigation.
You're right, so this isn't just about private beliefs. These were actions that hurt people.
This feels like a dark part of American history repeating itself. It's like these dangerous ideologies are coming back stronger than ever, fueled by a campaign that seems to be encouraging them.
It's a troubling trend for sure, and it shows how important it is to understand history, not just as dates and facts, but as a force that's still shaping the world today.
It's like we're at a crossroads. We have to decide what kind of country we want to be.
And each of us has to make that decision.
It can feel so overwhelming, especially when you see how powerful these forces are. What can we do as individuals to actually make a difference?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll discuss in detail after a short break.
So before the break, we were talking about how this whole situation with the Trump rally and the allegations about his father's ties to the KKK feels like a really dark moment in American history repeating itself. It makes you wonder where we go from here as individuals and as a country.
Yeah, it really does. I think the most important thing is to be informed and engaged citizens. We have to understand the issues, think critically about the information we're seeing, and participate in the process.
But so much of this feels like it's happening way out there on a national stage. It feels far removed from our daily lives. What can we as individuals really do to change things?
It starts with the small things. Having those tough conversations with friends and family, engaging in respectful dialogue with people who see things differently, and supporting organizations that are fighting for the things you believe in.
It sounds so simple, but I guess if millions of people are doing those small things, it could really start to make a difference.
Exactly. And don't forget about the power of your vote. Especially in an election this close, every single vote matters.
It's easy to get discouraged and feel powerless when you look at everything that's going on in politics. But you're right, we can't just give up. We have to believe that we can make a difference.
And this isn't just about this one election. This is about the kind of future we want to build for ourselves and for our kids and grandkids. Do we want to live in a society that's divided and fearful, or one that's united and compassionate?
It really does feel like a choice between two very different paths for our country.
It is, and we're the ones who have to make that choice. It's a huge responsibility, but it's also an amazing opportunity.
We've talked about the individual level, but what about the bigger picture? What needs to change in the system to keep this kind of toxic political environment from becoming the new normal?
That's a tough question. There's no easy fix. But I think one of the biggest things we need to address is disinformation. We need to hold social media companies accountable for the misinformation and hate speech that's spreading on their platforms.
And we need to learn how to be smarter about the information we're consuming. We need to teach ourselves and our kids how to recognize bias, how to spot fake news, and how to evaluate sources.
Absolutely. We also need to reform campaign finance. Right now, money has too much influence in politics. Politicians are more accountable to the people who donate to their campaigns than they are to the people they represent.
And that means that special interest groups have way too much power over the decisions that are being made. Often those decisions don't benefit the majority of people.
Exactly. We have to find a way to level the playing field and give regular citizens a bigger voice in our democracy.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. It's made us face some hard truths about our political system, but it's also given us a lot to think about as we try to move forward.
It's been a great conversation. I hope it's raised some important questions for you, our listeners.
As we head into this election, remember that we have a choice. We can just sit back and watch, Or we can get involved and try to shape the future of our country.
We can choose to be cynical and give up hope, or we can choose to believe that things can get better and take action to make it happen.
We can focus on the things that divide us, or we can try to build bridges and find common ground.
The choice is ours, and the future depends on what we choose.